Okay, hopefully you see my slides at the moment.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, great. So my name is Outi Valo. I work in the Finnish Folkmusiikki-instituutti, and I'm also in the researcher in the Diversity of Music Heritage project at the moment in the University of the Arts Helsinki. And I thought that we will say in the first of this webinar a little bit about the concepts that we are here using, because they are already in the topic, this ICH, which is referring to the intangible cultural heritage. And then there are, of course, archives and the ownership also in the topic. So this is very short introduction if some of the concept it's not familiar for you. So there are three main conventions related to the cultural heritage with UNESCO. So the World Heritage Convention was the first one in 1972, and that was concentrating more on monuments or group of buildings or sites. And then, for example, due to the different climate situation in different parts of the world, of course, somewhere the building technique was actually more important than the building itself. They didn't, for example, last that long in all parts of the world. So then this idea of practices and representations became more important. And this safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage convention was created in 2003. So there are, so that is more like intangible items compared to the tangible ones. And then there are third convention as well for protection of diversity of cultural expressions, 2005, but now we are concentrating more to this 2003 convention during this webinar. And there are also conventions in other levels, like the Faro Convention with the Council of Europe. So that doesn't divide in the same way this kind of tangible or intangible items, and it also concentrates a lot of communities that we are talking a lot today. But if you are looking, for example, the members of Council of Europe, then, for example, 18 countries hasn't ratified or signed this Faro Convention, and if we compare it to the Convention of the Safeguarding of ICH, only 2 of them hasn't ratified or accepted this convention. So, and also worldwide, the total number of the state parties who has ratified this convention is 183, and there are also accredited non-governmental organizations, NGOs, who can provide advisory services to the committee. And for example, our Finnish Folkmusiikki-instituutti is one of them. So the amount of them is 2006. So in this meaning, it is it is more shared language, how to say, related to the cultural heritage in this point of view. And let's see if I can change this a little bit. I will change my here. So now we can go to the definition of ICH. So this is very long definition, and I don't be reading the whole of that, but it is copied from the basic text of the convention, and practically the same issues that I showed the differences in the first slide. And it is interesting in the concept that it was actually created very recently in the same time when this convention was created. So it is not very old concept in a way. And for example, they could have chosen, for example, other concepts also to this convention. There's very good article from Kristin Gutma about the folklore to intangible cultural heritage, and for example, why this concept of folklore didn't came to the convention. And for example, it was there were different kind of ideas in different language groups what the folklore actually would mean, and it was used also in some countries to political purposes, and so this kind of a new concept didn't have this kind of package in the same way, so it was needed to create for this kind of international cooperation. And what we have taught.
Så vi har bara 3 minuter på oss att köpa det där.
Sorry. And there are few things that we
snabbt.
think about this, what are important in the definition, the community involvement, living heritage, mutual respect, human rights, and sustainable development. So those are the 5 things, for example, to our work that we have picked from this convention. And of course, the idea of safeguarding is there as well all the time.
Oj, förlåt.
And then
Tack.
the spirit of the UNESCO Convention in the archives, they
Är det någon av de här du
they can
gillar?
include very similar things. And so, for example, if we are reading the convention, there are a lot of mentions about community involvement, planning, and accessibility. They are very important in the archives. Help to recognize what is cultural heritage, and transmitting cultural heritage from generation to generation. That's very crucial in the convention. And support also the recreation of new cultural heritage. So in a way, the archive can be part of all of these points and seen as a safeguarding practice as well. And there are, of course, many examples how these can be implemented in the archives or in archival work. And I hope to hear many good examples also today. But I was just sharing few examples from our archival work. So, for example, this idea of transmitting cultural heritage. For example, we have recorded this kind of jamming or rehearsals of where the master folk musician is leading a folk music student to see how this kind of idea is transmitting is going. And of course, like recording like this kind of competitions where the idea is to create new contemporary folk music as well. And in my doctoral dissertation, I was looking about this folk music collecting mainly after Second World War with work of one of the most important folk music collectors, and he is probably having the biggest folk music collection in Finland. And well, the main period of time when he was collecting folk music was after the Second World War. But then I looked these kind of motives, why the folk music was recorded to the archives already before that. And after the independence, for example, this kind of saving the tradition or fear that it will vanish somehow, that was like highly emphasized in the motives. And this kind of idea of competition, like little bit of competition, that who has the biggest collections or what is the biggest archive came after the Second World War to the discussions. And then maybe in the late 60s started this kind of idea that should we emphasize more about the context, for example, where the object is collected, because not so much the object itself, but the context where it belongs. But these all were a little bit this kind of top-down perspectives where the heritage or how to say this collectors were, or the archives were deciding the valuable items. Whereas we were thinking now with the convention that is it more supporting the communities in safeguarding their own traditions, which is a bit more like this kind of bottom-up perspective. And from the northern areas, there are few examples that I now just lifted here. There are, of course, many of them, but this is now in the mapped area of our project. And for example, this collector that I looked in my thesis, he didn't saw the Sami cultural heritage, for example, in a way of living heritage in the same way as probably the majority of Finnish population, and rather he was looking this kind of origins of music when he went to the areas. So he had this kind of top-down definition of the heritage, that what it should be or how it should sound like, even he was outsider. And so we can actually ask that is the living heritage missing from the archives, especially with this kind of minorities and indigenous groups. And there was very good comment very recently in Financial Times in 1st of April from artist Outi Pieski, when she said that I want to question why the visual traditions of my ancestors are situated in ethnographic museums, while the Western visual traditions are in art museums. And I was thinking that this is exactly the same question with the music. So this is very good question, that why they are shared, or why what kind of standards there have been. So if we are looking at the ownership issues, this kind of intellectual property rights or rights of the companies, they are of course recognized more often compared to these communal ownership issues. But the convention is speaking a lot of these rights of the communities. They are mentioned in the convention several times with different kind of phases. But the problem is that the convention itself doesn't really define what the community is. So we were thinking about from the archival side that quite often, at least like previously, maybe not so much today at least, but this kind of if we are thinking about the community and the archive and then the artist who are using, for example, archival material in music, and this is very common in folk music scene in Finland, that the archive materials are used a lot, which is of course very nice thing. But then in the other hand, this voice of community is quite small in the use. So if we are thinking about that, the process goes like this from the through the archive to the artist, and not directly from the community to the artist. This kind of silences in the archive, or silences or misleading ideals or anything, they somehow they have a bigger effect, how to say, to the music that then the artist is creating. And of course then these ideals go back to the community. But we were thinking a lot that should we emphasize more of this kind of route, where the route from the archive goes via the community to the artist when we are using, for example, archival material. And then these kind of ideas of gatekeepers wouldn't, like if we are thinking about these collectors as gatekeepers, then they ideals or then they thoughts about what is heritage wouldn't be so much emphasized in the process. So concerning to the archives, communities could be deciding how music or ICH overall, not just music, could be part of the collections, how it's shown, and how could it be distributed forward. So these were the first thoughts that I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Outi. Very nice new pictures that I haven't seen myself, so I think we will use them. It was very interesting to hear.
Yeah, I was thinking that are they too provocative, because I actually made them in the lunch today. So I was thinking that is it a good idea to show the bubbles of the 1 hour of thinking, but now you can oppose me if they were not the correct ones.
We have been working a lot with the music education and folk music education and archives in that context. So I think this is also, I think we will use your pictures. They were very good. Thank you so much. Then I will have a short presentation about the project and then about our work package. And I will maybe just present my team, or our work package team. So we have Bent Midgren from Western Norrlands Museum from Sweden, and then Outi, and then me, and we are working three of us with this work package 5, which is about archives and music collections. So I will also share some slides and then go on like this. Okay, so our Finnish Folk Music Institute, just the background. So I'm director of Finnish Folk Music Institute, and we are working with archives, museums, education, research, anything there is to promote the practicing of folk music. And we do it in all Finland. This is our goal, but also we work with a lot of projects, international and in Finland. And this ICH North, I think this is one of the greatest example of our thriving project and collaboration that we are doing. Just in few words, our organization. And then about the project. So we have been working a little bit more than a year. It's a 3-year project. It's funded by Interreg Aurora, so European Union. And Outi already showed the map of the area. So it's the northern Finland and Sweden and Norway, including also Sapmi. And so we are concentrated on that geographical area. The other kind of underlining ideas are music. So we are concentrated on music practices. Then we are concentrating on the UNESCO 2003 convention, or the concept of intangible cultural heritage. And then also we are concentrating on transmission. Our name is ICH North, passing on our musical heritage. So there we have the north, the geographical area, the idea of transmission, and then the idea of ICH, heritage, and then music. So these are kind of the underlying themes of the whole project, but we are working on many levels. So here you can see our working packages. So first of all, we are doing a MOOC course, and then a digital map of the communities, the music communities in the area, producing educational material and education in general. And then we are also promoting the entrepreneurship and the cultural tourism side of it. And then our working package is the fifth one, which is a joint strategy for community involvement. And this we have kind of narrowed down so that we talk about music collections. So they can be in museums or archives or in any kind of institutions, but normally archives. But we kind of the concept that we are giving is music collection. And and then our guiding documents are the UNESCO Convention, but the Faro Convention also, like Outi mentioned, and then the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 framework. And we have different inspirational things that we have encountered. And actually we are now, with this webinar, we are looking at two of them because of our guests. So first of all, the ICH Museums project, and then the traditional knowledge labels. But then also we kind of try to have a hands-on approach, so that we also take inspiration from tools like the Spinner of Living Heritage that we have been also working with the Heritage Agency in Finland. And what do we do in our work package? We have expert workshops with different archives, with different institutions, and we have had already 2, and we will have at least 2 more, but I think we will have even more than that. And we go to archive or music collection experts, and then we will ask them that what do they think about our topics and the themes and plans, and if they are interested to join in our work. And then we are asking them that what would be a good outcome of our project. And I will now present you the themes of our work package. We have 3 different themes: ownership, documentation, and then dissemination. And the real idea is that these are ownership, documentation, and dissemination are very normal things for all the music collectors or archives. But we try to, with this project, we try to see if the community involvement has been implemented in a good manner in all of these 3 steps. What is there to learn? Could we do it better? Could we have some guidelines for archives, for institutions with music collections, so that they would do the work with community involvement better in the future. And so these three themes will be separately investigated. Like now we are working with this first one, ownership. This is the first webinar. And I will give you an example maybe of all of the three themes from our own archive from Finnish Folk Music Institute. So we have an archive that is based on, the material is based on folk music collections from the last 50 decades maybe. And we have, for example, like a village group of folk music, and that we record at the festival. And we have recorded maybe many years the same village group, like a contemporary folk music group, who have some connections with the other generations, but are not very different from the popular music maybe identity. So we have a lot of these kind of groups in our archives, but as we have not had the experience working with, for example, with indigenous or endangered cultures or such, we don't question ourselves so often about the ownership. Like, do the practitioners that we have recorded or the material that we have collected, how we ask the community actually what they think that we should do with it? Is it okay? Is there a connection to the community still? Or is it just some names in the paper and then we just kind of consume them? So the same ideas that we will now hear about from Maui, about the indigenous circumstances where the ownership is much more visible than maybe from our archives standpoint, but still the concepts are very same. And I think we have lots to learn about community involvement and good archive work and music collection work with these themes, and with the kind of the making the themes and the ideas visible. Of course, there are questions with copyright and also community rights, and then we will hear about this example. But the other topics will be, or the themes are the documentation. So when we do the collecting, when we record, for example, from practitioners, do we ask the practitioners what would they think that should be collected or recorded? Maybe, for example, if we do it with the Finnish Folk Music Institute, we do the recording at the festival on stage, actually. Maybe the practitioners think that we should make it at their home when it's more comfortable to play, or maybe just a jam session would be more important. So there is this interaction with the community about the documenting. What should be documented, where, how, and kind of this side of the archive. And then the last is the dissemination, when we maybe make a book out of the collection. Do we, in that point, do we involve the communities in that work? Or maybe if we create a platform to open up our archive collections, so are the communities involved in that? So these are the three themes of our working package. And also we will work with practitioner workshops. So we try to go to different communities and have an interview with the communities, and try to find out the kind of the ideas and the prioritization that the communities have in this archive work, to really kind of get the whole scope of it. First the expert scope, but then also the practitioner side of it. And also, Outi, maybe you can give some insights about the research work that you're implementing during this.
Yeah. We had the idea with the researcher Heidi Henrikka Mäkelä that we would use the workshop materials as a research material also, to look at these dynamics between the artists and the communities and the archives, little bit maybe from the similar perspective that I had the bubbles in the final slide and then look at this issue that how the communities or different communities are defining, for example, these ideals of ownership from their view.
Yes, thank you, Odi. Then we will have the webinars of the work package, and now this is the historical moment of the first webinar of this work package, and we will have it on the different themes. First, this one is about ownership, then the documentation, next one, and then after that the dissemination, and then after the last webinar will be about the output of our project. So we are trying to make a white paper or some kind of a strategy or roadmap for the archives, for the institutions with music collections in our area, so that they could work better and take into consideration these themes better in the future. And how to join the webinars, of course, but we would be very happy to organize an expert meeting with you, with your museum, with your staff, with your organization, but also with the practitioner group. If you would think that this would be an interesting thing to talk about, we would be very happy to do that. And then our social media and other kind of normal ways. And please contact if anything comes into your mind. And maybe I will just ask last, Bengt and Odi, did I miss something or something you want to add? Or?
I think it was very good.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So,
Yes, it's clear.
so this is in a nutshell, this was our project, and then I will just have to. Yes, so now we can go on, and we will have Maui Hudson, so director from Te Kotahi Research Institute, University of Waikato, also associated professor. Please, Maui, the floor is yours.
Kia ora. Thanks, Maddie. You did very well with the Māori words as well. I keep forgetting that we have Māori names for our university and Māori names for this, and can be a challenge sometimes. But thanks for the invitation to join you, and I think it's great to be here discussing this. My name's Maui Hudson. I'm a member of the Whakatohia Nation, which is one of the Māori tribes in New Zealand. I'm on the tribal council there and been involved with supporting some of our cultural revitalization activities as well. But alongside my work at the university has mostly been around things like Indigenous research ethics. Been fortunate to work with some colleagues in looking at Sami research ethics as well. And then have been working alongside the local context. So I'll try and give a little bit of a background into how that's come together and give you some examples of how it's being applied in different contexts as well. So I'll just share the screen. And try not to scare you with the number of slides. But this is really, thinking about the way traditional knowledge has been used in this space, in particular thinking about how the different ways in which community voice can be brought into an archive and reflect their ideas around what provenance and what protocols and permissions might be communicated to anyone else that's looking at that material. So just introducing some of the people. Local Context is an NGO that's been set up as an entity to support communities and institutions around the world. Jane Anderson, who was a IP expert from New York University, was the founder alongside others. And Stephanie Johnson is our inaugural executive director. She just began at the end of last year. And then James Francis is a tribal historian from the Penobscot Nation, which is one of the groups that's worked on the development of the labels. And he's the chair of the council. But you can see the rest of the team at link below there. And one of the areas I've been working a lot around for the last number of years is this kind of thinking around Indigenous data sovereignty. And this is probably a little bit like the Indigenous cultural heritage, sort of an idea that swirls around at a big level. But essentially what it's around is about how to improve greater Indigenous control of Indigenous data. And you could think about that maybe in a local context, greater local control of local data. You know, how do people participate and get involved in decisions about access and governance and control of those things? So one of the sets of principles that was put together was the CARE principles. And this was done to sort of inform the activities that were happening, particularly around the collection, storage, and aggregation. Not just the collection and storage, because I think, you know, the work of archives has been happening for a long time, but increasingly the digitization and then sharing of that information in an open way, which means that the material you have is now being accessed by people all around the globe. And your ability to affect or influence the things they use it for is limited. And so the FAIR principles are one of the sets of principles which really talk about how that is supposed to happen, or how that open sharing of data goes about. And the CARE principles were really speaking a little bit more to the people and the purpose of use. So ideas around collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility and ethics underpin that. And they were put together in support with the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. Now, this is interesting in some ways, or could be relevant in some ways, because it's now being discussed about across a number of different sort of policy agencies. UNESCO refers to it in a number of their documents now, including their recommendation on open science. We've been talking with the World Atlas of Online Languages, which has been wanting to think about how they respond to CARE in their context, and where the labels might fit in that, and a whole sort of range of other spaces. Have been translated into a series of different languages. Nothing from the Nordic countries yet, so maybe that becomes an activity for someone along the way. But there is a Gita Sapmi, a Sami that looks at Sami research data governance, and you can find that and the people that are involved with leading that initiative as well. I just provided the link there too. So from a sort of an Indigenous community point of view, there's a number of sort of problems with data and information systems. Lots of the material that's held in these archives comes from Indigenous spaces, and they're often they haven't got access to them in their own communities, but they're sitting in these institutions. Often when the material was collected, proper provenance information wasn't gathered, and so that doesn't sit in the record. The communities themselves aren't the legal rights holders, and so trying to think about control outside of the legal framework becomes difficult. And this is not just this isn't just an issue of sort of legacy samples, but there's more and more researchers that are doing work. So we're adding to the archives every day. And the digitization of this material often embeds those mistakes. So, if the provenance material isn't on the physical record, it's not going to be on the digital record. And how can you work in with communities to start addressing some of those problems? And so it gets into conversations about what does the appropriate acknowledgement look like, or attribution, or authorship, as things are sitting around the sort of records, but then those records being used to create publications or books or other types of things. And then beyond that, there's different sorts of conversations that might emerge around what appropriate access looks like. Some things may be restricted or not, And then what does this mean in terms of thinking about authority? So Maddie mentioned sort of ownership and governance, and these sort of ideas, how is that authority represented in some of the spaces where decisions are made about the use of that material. So one of the big things is how can you govern Indigenous data if you can't find it? That's actually what that word says. All of those letters say, and it's kind of deliberately obscured. But below there you can see probably something. Hopefully your archive looks much better than those. But the difficulty that communities will have in accessing that, and this is one of the reasons often why we want to digitize things, so it improves that accessibility. So sort of talked a little bit about it, and this was really the background into the development of the labels. There's sort of limitations in the way in which copyright can be sought, but also how long it lasts for. And so things that might have been collected a long time in the past, the copyright expires, it becomes part of the public domain. Material that's been generated kind of in more recent times, there's been this big push to apply Creative Commons licenses to it. But that can only be done by the copyright holder. So if the community isn't the copyright holder, then they don't have a say in either of those processes. And that's where the idea for developing labels came up. And so the labels sit there as a sort of a digital tag or a marker, but it's an extra legal mechanism. So copyright is related to IP. Creative Commons is a licensing of that IP. This sits external to that framework, and at the moment is sort of an educational or really an educational initiative that lets people know what the community thinks about the appropriate use of that data or those records. So and actually just here, we're talking both about what we call labels and what we call notices. And there's a sort of an important distinction to make there between the labels only being able to be applied by the communities themselves, and the notices being put in place by institutions or researchers that are working with them. And what we mean by that is that those institutions or researchers have a responsibility to disclose when they have Indigenous material in their collections or where they have collected material from Indigenous populations, not just for themselves, but actually for all of the next users, all of the people that are going to go and look at it, so they know that that's the case. And so we have these two types of notices. One is an engagement notice, and that's really just indicating that or letting institutions inform the public or those communities that they are open to working and having discussions around this sort of activity. And then there's what we call disclosure notices, or the other notices that go on the content and say, look, there's we hold this material, but there are some Indigenous interests in it. And it's in some ways a little bit of a disclaimer. So it's still in an open space, but it's just letting people know that are accessing it that they may not have free rein to just do whatever they like with it. And so with both of with the notice itself and the labels, they have an icon and they have some accompanying text. For the notices, that text isn't modifiable. It's just a standard statement, although there's ability to add optional kind of use statements. And one of the important things about how the notices work as well, at least the disclosure notices, is that we start to create unique IDs associated so we can connect them to labels in the future. And you'll see how some of that comes about. But this is an example of the Open to Collaborate notice, just sitting on the website. This is the American Philosophical Society. They hold the largest collection of Indigenous languages in the US. been collected over time, and so they're just indicating that they're happy to collaborate with communities around that material. This is the open to collaborate notice sitting on this image archive. This is at Simon Fraser University. This is the most trafficked image archive on the west coast of the United States. This is in Canada, but across that kind of western seaboard, and they have a open to collaborate notice sitting there. And here's one for a collection of Native American ethnography. This is at the New York State Museum. So kind of inviting, in some ways it's a recognition of those institutions that they know that they actually haven't got the right attribution in place for a lot of things, and that they want to work with communities and be more participatory around the material that they provide. And so that creates an opportunity for then the community to add their information that they think is relevant in terms of provenance, protocols, and permissions. And we have 2 sets of labels, traditional knowledge ones that's obviously relevant to Indigenous cultural heritage material, and then biocultural ones, which have been more about scientific collections and Indigenous flora and fauna. But there's times when those things overlap, and you might think that more in, say, a museum which has samples of plants, and then that's used, and there might be some accompanying traditional knowledge that sits there, and then that's used to do some kind of gene sequence of that material. But often in the traditional knowledge, there may be songs about that plant, and so often these worlds come together in sort of unexpected ways. So these are the labels that have been generated. They were generated alongside communities over the past kind of 12, 13 years, as Jane was working with communities around kind of material which they held. Sometimes it was cultural heritage material that was sitting in museums. Sometimes it was language materials. Often it was also songs. Then those, the way that they wanted to express their feelings and thoughts about it would be then represented within the label. If there was already an existing label that met those aims, that sat there. If it wasn't, then another one was developed, and we've ended up with this set that sits here. So provenance labels that reflect attribution back to the tribe as a whole, but then also maybe sub-bits. It might be the clan that's responsible, or it might be a family that has the authority to speak for a particular thing, and so that can be noted. Sometimes it's reflecting, you might be reflecting that this material relates to you, but it also relates to other communities as well. So the ability to acknowledge multiple community interests and material sits there. Protocol labels, sometimes there were restrictions associated with it. Often there were songs that could only be sung in particular seasons, and so that can be reflected with the seasonal label, or they might be secret. And then different ways of permissioning activities, so outreach, knowing that actually educational use is something that's valuable and we want to continue promoting that, but that might be in the context of non-commercial applications. And here you can see each of the labels has a sort of a statement which sort of defines what it's used for, and that kind of sits in different places, and you can see those things on the website. The one here, multiple communities. Responsibility and ownership of this material is spread across several distinct communities. Use will be dependent on discussion and negotiation with multiple communities. Different sorts of things. And the other kind of feature about them, because these are being used by lots of different communities, the icon on the label stays the same, but the text associated with it is customized by each community. So while a label from my community might look the same from one from a Sámi community, the actual text around it is different. And this is an example from a community in Canada. And you can see they've been able to add their own language as part of the description, and just say that, you know, this is what attribution means to them. It literally means name and place in their language. And they're just asking people that are accessing this website and accessing the material to attribute the knowledge and histories to them. So it's sort of a kind of a process that's supporting that appropriate acknowledgement. This is an example, it's probably relevant in this context. This was the first ever recordings done on the Native American lands. And this was with the Passamaquoddy tribe, which is up around Maine. It was actually being done to test the technology. So this was the early days of wax cylinders. And they were testing the technology with this community before they went and did an expedition in sort of New Mexico and down around the Southwest. And so over time, that recording ended up in the Library of Congress. And this is the record that was associated with it. So it mentions the name of the community, but that's all they had. And so in lots of ways, it's, you know, quite an impoverished one. They were able to go through a process of engaging with the community and starting to bring forward a lot more information. And so if you go to the new record, and this is the one that sits in the Library of Congress itself, you can see there's information that sits in there about what are the songs being sung and what they're about. And then the community have added a lot more traditional knowledge to this record. So this is a public record. And so this information is being shared in an open way, but it also has the traditional knowledge label sitting alongside it. The one around attribution, saying it's okay to use for outreach, but not for commercial purposes. And you can go and look at this material. The interesting thing around it, thinking about it from a sort of a digital infrastructure point of view, is really finding the places where these things can sit. So the JSON file, and they have to create a space for traditional knowledge labels there. Interesting thing around this is that as soon as you do this, even though this was effectively a pilot with one community, you now can then work with a whole range of other communities to add this sort of material and put this material in place. And that was then connected with Dublin Core and the fields here, the 540 fields, which relate to rights. That was a place where they located the text associated with each of the labels that were selected. And so this is all the kind of things that are sitting in the back. But in the front, on the rights advisory, they decided to add the information about the labels there. So even though I mentioned right at the beginning, these aren't intellectual property rights, they've been formally recognized as cultural rights, and also as, in some ways, the first rights, because they're sitting above the legal copyright that's held by the Peabody Museum at Harvard University. And so this then created this kind of really interesting dynamic, because this sat on the record for the past sort of 7 or 8 years. But now if you go and look at it, this is what you see. So Harvard University asked to be removed from the rights advisory, because they decided that if someone wants to do something with Passamaquoddy language, they should be going back to the tribe to have that discussion, not coming to them. But I think, you know, this is something that wouldn't have been possible if there wasn't the labels in place to replace or to, you know, give a different sort of option or alternative to what was sitting there. So just a few sort of examples, you know, that was the example in the Library of Congress alongside the Passamaquoddy. They use the labels themselves on their own material as well. So it's not just being used by communities for the things material that sits in other places. They're using it to share information on their own platforms. And allows them to also tell the story in ways that they might like to tell it, which will often be similar, but may have, you know, different nuances to it as well. This is the example we showed from Canada of the Scarlets. This is where they're talking about the labels, but they've used them in sort of physical spaces as well. But on this website where they use the labels, they're sharing lots of traditional knowledge in video formats, and other sorts of stories are shared. Here's a digital archive, the Huna Heritage Digital Archive. This is used within the Merkatu platform, Indigenous Content Management System, which currently has the labels hardwired into it. But we're sort of in the process of having that so it becomes a part of the hub which we've created, so we can see how that can be shared in other spaces. This is my community, Whakatohia. We created what we call a Waiata app. So this is the app of our traditional songs. You can see on here we have a range of different songs. We have the text associated with the words for them, and we have the labels on there as well. It's good. You can listen to them. So you know, this has been one of the ways in which we've trying to share our own knowledge about these things with our own community, because 90% of us live outside of our traditional areas. So this is sort of like the first of a series of apps which are allowing us to share that material. We've also been working in with the Ngā Taonga, which is the Sound and Film Archive in New Zealand, to try and think about how do we get access and start bringing back some of the material that's sitting in those spaces and putting it on our own digital repository, which we can then use as the basis for these kinds of activities. And actually, you can go and download this. There's like, this is on the App Store, and it comes with, I think, 3 songs, and then you have to get a password from us if you want to get the other 30. But we've also used the labels and other materials. So this is a research project which created a sort of I guess an environmental plan, and part of this is a traditional chant that was used that talked about places along our coast, important and significant places, and then we're sharing that material within the context of this document, but applying the traditional knowledge labels there, just to say that this chant would normally only be used by the community. Has some labels have been used in the context of a video series, which is Cook Island communities that were sharing stories about their childhood, and the sorts of things they remember from growing up, and they've used traditional knowledge labels on this. So sort of a mix of applications where it's on the record, and the record's sitting in the archive, and then when that's used to develop different sorts of new products or new items, it can sit alongside those. This is a book and a series of videos that were put together sharing traditional knowledge of a elder growing up in Canada, First Nations community in Canada. And they're using the labels because they're wanting people to access that knowledge, but to respect it as it's being shared. And then we just find all sorts of different ways to apply them. This is a medicine garden. We can walk around and see the traditional plants. and they have the traditional knowledge sitting alongside that material, and they've put the traditional knowledge labels into, you can see there, put them onto the tree trunks in those spaces. And really just been working with other places too, trying to support and acknowledge researchers that work with communities in the right sort of way, or you know, in a more collaborative and engaged way, so that as they do that and start to apply notices or labels to the material, it can also be recognized on their own kind of records in a research space, but also within publications. So it sort of acknowledges the work of those, the ethical practice of those researchers, but also continues to connect to the communities as well. So if you're interested, there's ways you can check out more on the website. We've also created a couple of films. You can have a look on there that talk generally about the labels and the application of traditional knowledge labels with the Penobscot community, and then our community, and some of the things we did around more of the natural heritage collections and science spaces. So I think I kept to my 30 minutes. I'm just happy to answer any questions if there's any.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maui. As expected, that was very, very, very interesting and informative. I think we have a little time for questions here, and then we can continue with Kia, and then have like an end discussion where we can again come to the same topics. But thank you, Maui, and Susanna, please.
Hi. Hi, I'm Susanna Eklund from the National Library of Finland. We've been thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting and informative, and we've been talking a lot with our network about the need to adopt some kind of labeling system for this use, kind of on a Nordic level, for kind of all sorts of cultural heritage and digital platforms, and kind of we are in the process of gathering the partners and kind of benchmarking the possible labeling systems. And my question to you is what is your experience and thoughts about the status of the traditional knowledge labels? Are they already internationally on a standardized level in a way that you, or are there, do you know of any other kind of similar or other systems that kind of
Yeah, sure.
Yes, yeah, sorry, I was kind of my English today is not so very good, and my thoughts are
I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, so look, it's fair to say that the traditional knowledge labels emerged, and their initial use cases were in Australia, the US, Canada, and then New Zealand. They have been applied in more and in those communities is probably with, you know, select groups, you know, just specific tribes within those regions. They have been adopted and used in a range of other places now. In Cambodia, there's a community there that's been using it. Had ones in Africa that have expressed interest. There's ones more and more in Latin America as well. They fill a particular, I guess they fill a particular need that seems to have been expressed everywhere. I think there's a little bit of, often a little bit of misapprehension about, you know, when people are wanting to do something with local communities or an Indigenous space, they often prefer it to be generated from a sort of a community thing and not really adopting things from other places. But I think we're just seeing that people, if they see some value in using it, that's a good thing. One of the other things about thinking about the labels and what it does is that it opens up the conversations about what sort of metadata and what sorts of fields need to be in place to make space for whether it's the labels themselves or any other labeling system or material that might be required. And so that's where, alongside that, there's conversations about how care works, conversations about Indigenous metadata have all been in sort of a related discussions. In a cultural heritage space, they've been sitting in a rights field in certain platforms. There might be different ways people might think about that. In the biological spaces, there's kind of shifting around where they sit as well. They speak to sometimes issues around access and sometimes issues around rights, and sometimes issues around protocols, which would traditionally sit in other, in separate fields. So I think it's growing, and there's nothing else I've seen that does the same type of thing as it. And there's nothing else that has had such a long incubation working with communities themselves to feed into its development and then be kind of tested across or used by a number of different communities to get to the point where you'd think it could be standardized. And it's getting embedded now in enough different institutions across different countries that it's probably the closest thing to a standard that's available at the moment.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
No other questions? I have one, actually. I would very much want to know, we learned in the Finnish Folk Music Institute, we learned about your work maybe 3-4 years ago. And since then, we've been kind of trying to adapt the ideas to our own work. But we are not working with Indigenous communities, or just very rarely and in collaboration, but not actually with our own material. So it's like a majority archive. But our take is in a way so that, or the way that we try to understand it to work for the future generations, so that we would already kind of have the legal community rights involved in our work, so that also the future generations, because could kind of live with it. And we don't know the situation after 10 years, after 100 years, how it is. So how do you think that your work, or the work with the local context and with the traditional knowledge labels, is it, how do you consider the Indigenous kind of the community here? Is it adaptable in your view to any kind of maturity collections also, or how do you see this kind of adaptability?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I've seen a few different groups sort of, I guess, recognize the value of the underpinning idea of some kind of collective interest or community interest in it. I think that there's an interesting relationship between like Indigenous and local communities, and even in a sort of an Indigenous field in Unesco, how they're represented and how they relate to each other. And I guess, there's sometimes I think I've been sort of advocate for Indigenous on the basis of my background and the communities I've been primarily working with. But I think the ideas do translate. What you're just trying to do is sort of think about, those things about what does appropriate acknowledgement look like, what's appropriate attribution, and then as soon as you start getting up into those things around access and authority, it's like, what's the entity you should be engaging with that represents that community? And some of the Indigenous communities, it's a little bit clearer where the boundary around that sits. With some local, and some local communities, there's a clear boundary around that too. but depends whether there's an entity or I guess an entity that's accountable in a way that that community is comfortable with them speaking, because you're never engaging with everyone, you're engaging with a part of it that's doing it on behalf of that group.
Thank you. Johanna, did you have a question?
Actually, I already got pretty much the answer for what I was going to ask, so I think I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Outi, yeah, please.
Yeah, I was still, thanks you for the wonderful presentation. I was thinking about that. What kind of concrete steps you are taking with the communities when you are creating the labels? Is there always some from the archive part of the negotiation, or can the communities do them without also the archive, or how does it usually works?
So it usually the conversation, the use of the tool usually arises because they're dealing with a context which requires it. And that's usually some sort of discussion or engagement with a research group or an institution. Often they might be trying to get material from or have more say over some material that's sitting in an institution. And that becomes the context for discussions around intellectual property and control and where these things sit, and then how authority can be expressed, and then so part of it is the conversation that's external with the institution, and then part of it ends up being internal. So that discussion around, where should the authority sit? Where's the governance around this process sitting? Who should be involved in actually the development, the customizing of the label and the development of that text, and then also who are the people that then decide which labels get applied to kind of what material. But then that is linked in with the institutions as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we will go on, and then we will have Kia, please, and we will hear about your project. Please, the floor is yours.
Share my screen. Just a second.
That's it.
Can you see it?
Not yet, but it's loading, so hopefully it's coming.
So on my screen it's up, but I don't know if you can see it.
Nope.
Yeah, I have also this loading text here.
Let me try again.
Nope. Now we can see not the presentation mode, but the other one.
I have it in presentation mode, but otherwise I will have to try differently.
Yeah, for some reason when you change it to presentation mode, it doesn't show us anymore, but before it does. Yeah.
And we tested it before and it did work.
Yeah.
Right? So we will have a little technical pause here, but this is how it is.
I've downloaded. It's on our drive, so it might work better if it's a downloaded version.
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Yeah.
Sorry.
So also the idea of having Kia here was because of the ICH North, so, and especially our working package. So we are working with intangible cultural heritage and with archives, and your project you've been working with intangible cultural heritage and with museums, and in many cases it's very, very kind of a similar institutions that we are talking about. and there are very many kind of things to learn. And this is what we have found with OT and our team, like during these years. So I think this is
the same as I've been thinking. There are a lot of similarities, but also specificities. Of course, there are differences between museums and archives.
Yeah.
So my PowerPoint is loading.
And we will, I think, one of the interesting topic is something that we have been talking also with the music education and with the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki, with the folk music education department. And now that we are kind of trying to understand as a field on whole, this new concept of intangible cultural heritage and kind of the community approach, like what are the connections between the so-called memory institutions? I don't know if it's an English word or not, but anyways, like libraries and archives and museums, because they all kind of take care of the memory of humanity in a way, and but they are not concentrated actually with the living culture. But then it's very connected to the living culture. So what are these kind of the boundaries and what is there to learn? I think this is very, very interesting also from the library point of view, and maybe that will come also, the ICHN libraries someday. Or maybe it is already, I just don't know. But
I'm struggling.
I think we could see it quite nicely. If it's not in the presentation mode, it doesn't, I don't know. No, we are seeing something. Now, yes.
It's working?
It's working perfectly.
Okay. Sorry for the inconvenience. Hi, everybody. So my name is Kiat Sakiridis. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this webinar. I'm employed at an NGO called Workshop Intangible Heritage. We are located in Belgium, and we work on safeguarding intangible heritage in the regions of Flanders and Brussels, so the northern and central part of Belgium. And we also manage the website immaterieelerfgoed.be or intangibleHeritage.be that you can see here on the screen. It includes the Flemish inventories of intangible heritage, and we manage it together with the Flemish government. I am currently in charge of the management of our NGO, but in the past I was in charge of developing the ICHN Museums project. And I was asked to elaborate on what we have learned throughout the project that could be of inspiration for archives, but maybe also other memory institutions, as you were saying, when you're engaging in safeguarding intangible heritage, and especially in relation to music collections. So our project ran from 2017 to 2020, and it explored the variety of approaches, interactions, and practices on safeguarding intangible heritage together with museums. We had partners from the Netherlands, Italy, France, and Switzerland, and our funding mainly came from the Creative Europe program. So we organized a series of expert meetings, conferences that featured keynotes, position papers, a series of inspiring examples, debates, panels with practitioners of intangible heritage. And we also funded and facilitated some co-creations or collaborations between museums and communities or groups or individuals that practice intangible heritage. So we have a dedicated project website, ichnmuseums.eu, and all of the outcomes of our project is available on that website. So what we did with the project, we explored on policy and more practical levels where the world of intangible heritage and that of museums meet. And we worked primarily in a Western European context. So where and how can all parties involved in safeguarding intangible heritage reinforce each other in looking for ways to develop sustainable new methodologies for caring for this heritage? What approaches do already exist and can be helpful to support this process? And here you see a spread from our publication that was called Museums and Intangible Heritage Towards a Third Space in the Heritage Sector, a companion to discover transformative heritage practices for the 21st century. So the main premise of behind everything that we have discovered during the course of the project is summarized here. It is a quote from the declaration that was written by the partners at the end of the project. And it states that all parties that are involved have differing but equal and especially complementary levels of capacity and expertise in relation to caring for intangible heritage. Both those involved directly in intangible heritage, so its practitioners, the people who embody and transmit the living heritage, and museums professionals aiding in the safeguarding. And the most important lesson that we have learned is that all these skill sets and existing know-how should be pulled together. And by doing so, new types of expertise can be developed that blends all of the experiences and capacities of the people involved. So behind this idea of transforming and combining approaches for caring and intangible heritage, with the IMP project, there lies a methodological framework that places the common approaches from within the museum field on the one hand, that is based on the ICOM Code of Ethics and the ICOM Museum definition, next to the UNESCO safeguarding measures for living heritage. And what we do is propose indeed that we pool these method skills, know-how, expertise from the parties on the left, the museums and the professionals from the museum sector, and the people that are engaged in safeguarding, so that they can actively collaborate. What happens then is there at the intersection, new methods for caring for this heritage can come about and new possibilities for transmitting living heritage to the future can take shape. So throughout the project and throughout the work we have done also in Flanders, in Belgium, we distinguished some strategical principles that should be part of organizations' operations when they work on safeguarding intangible heritage. For example, also what we did here at the beginning of this webinar is making sure that everybody has a clear-cut view on what intangible heritage really is and what it means for the organization that you're working on. Second is to make sure that the participation of the practitioners is at the core of all actions and all the processes that relate to safeguarding these living traditions. And also to apply an ethical approach, for example, based on prevalent codes of conduct for heritage professionals. And in our case, it was about the ICOM Code of Ethics and the UNESCO ethical principles for safeguarding intangible heritage. We also distinguished some principles that are related to caring for intangible heritage. For example, to be mindful of the specific staff skills that are required when supporting the safeguarding of intangible heritage. That can be quite different than the ones that are commonly present with museum staff. Or to be mindful of the subsidiary status of collections and objects when it comes to intangible heritage. Because key is making sure that the living heritage can continue to be performed. And also, for example, to involve communities, groups, and individuals that practice intangible heritage from start to finish. So not just in the final phases of production or mediation when an exhibition comes about or a book is published, but also, as we also saw before, for example, when it comes to collection management, data management, metadating, etc. So some examples of how we see this combination of functions that museums carry out next to safeguarding measures are further developed in this graph that's also available on our website through the link that's here. Research, for example, is both a task for museums as well as a measure that contributes to safeguarding intangible heritage. On the one hand, you have, for example, museum professionals that are specialized in undertaking scientific research on tangible and intangible heritage. And usually it's related to the objects that are part of their collection. On the other hand, you have the study and research of living heritage that can take on so many diverse forms, requiring at minimum, according to the UNESCO Convention, the prior and informed consent of the involved communities, groups, and individuals. And next to that, accessibility to the research and its outputs are key. But at the intersection of these approaches, museums and practitioners of intangible heritage alike, both can be viewed as sources of information for research. They can provide enriching perspectives relating to the context and value of intangible heritage and its related objects. Applying several research methodologies might also broaden the scope and the relevance of the content of the research. Another example is the task of communication that is bestowed upon museums next to awareness raising as a safeguarding measure for intangible heritage. So in society, museums, but also archives, play a vital role in communicating about intangible cultural heritage. They have large audiences at their disposal and they can communicate to the broader public relatively easily. Awareness raising on intangible heritage should reflect the inclusive and widest possible participation of involved communities, groups, and individuals. It should make sure that living heritage is interpreted correctly, not decontextualized, misappropriated, or over-commercialized. Promoting intangible heritage could therefore be a joint effort, including the realization of exhibitions, publications, etc., that can reach many potentially interested audiences or even future practitioners. So both museum professionals and its current day practitioners alike can provide the right information and context about this heritage. For example, relating to its diversity, its value and function in society, the role that the practitioners play today, the threats and the risks that it might face. So this and a whole series of other tools are part of the toolkit that we have developed in the context of the ICH and Museum project. The toolkit is available online on our website, and it was co-created, as you can see here on the photos, with all the participants in the different sessions of our project throughout the 5 partner countries. The participants both provided the questions that needed to be answered and input in order to be able to answer them. So for example, here you see a brainstorm exercise that was developed in order to be able to understand what intangible heritage is relevant to a specific museum. For example, by creating a mind map, zooming in on the mission and vision statement of the museum, its networks, its collections. Subsequently, some guidelines for deciding on relevant criteria in order to be able to decide on the scope that will be taken into account. And finally, tips on selecting, focusing, and concluding on how to go about. And another brainstorm exercise that helps organizations in deciding who to involve when working on intangible heritage and on deciding the intensity of this collaboration. The tools are developed for museums with museums, but could just as well work in the context of archives or other types of heritage institutions. And our project website also includes numerous inspirational examples that we have collected from museums that have worked on safeguarding living heritage. And some of the examples that we gathered come from organizations that also have sound archives in their care. For example, the Museum of Ethnography of Geneva in Switzerland, where they offer access to contemporary practitioners to realize new compositions based on archival material. And there in the green box, they advise us to be conscious about the legal work that is of the essence and to let source communities express their wishes and concerns relating to their musical legacies and to look for the right intermediaries if the communities are difficult to reach. Or the Norwegian Center for Traditional Music and Dance, that sees museum premises as places where people can practice their knowledge and share it with others while facilitating and curating the work without playing the role of an expert. Or the Museum of Popular Arts and Traditions in France that collaborates with an NGO that promotes the safeguarding of maritime musical heritage, making the museum a more interactive place that also plays a true active part in the transmission of this living musical tradition. You could say that museums have an advantage over archives because they house objects that often vividly speak to people's imagination. Like, for example, this museum in Antwerp, which is called Het Vleeshuis. And it tells the story of 800 years of music and dance in this city. They support, among others, the current day craftsmanship of instrument building, offering residencies to instrument builders, letting them do the building in the museum. So their role might look more concrete and obvious when it comes to safeguarding intangible heritage. But in my opinion, in a more networked approach, it's important to pull together existing skill sets of all those institutions as well that can be part of safeguarding intangible heritage, and to focus on the complementary strengths that each one of them has. And indeed, a museum is no archive, no library. Archives can have a different role to play, in my opinion, focusing on their expertise and their strengths. So I see many opportunities for archives to support the safeguarding of intangible. I think listening carefully to the hopes, wants, and needs of the communities involved, concerned with the contents of your archives, is key, but also to rely on their expertise to enrich your work and your knowledge. Do they want access to information from the past in order to find inspiration for new creations? Or do they want to better understand their own history? Do they want your help with their current day archival work, making sure their documents are safely and accessibly stored in your archive building or in situ? Are they looking for a space to perform their living heritage or just gather? I think it's important to find out what you can do in order to support them, or sometimes even better, empower them, while also keeping your own mission, vision, and institutional capacity in mind. And also exchanging ideas and methods with other heritage institutions is key, next to knowing all the people and organizations in your own networks that have a role to play in safeguarding, because there is no need for anyone to do everything on their own. So not only new types of expertise on safeguarding can be developed, but I think the existing capacities of different parties can be sustainably drawn on with a view on safeguarding intangible heritage. I wanted to conclude with giving you also some insights in some new initiatives that we have developed the past years and that we continue developing. There's, for example, work that we are doing with CIDOC, which is the an ICOM working group on intangible heritage, where we look at ways on how to develop an application profile for recording living heritage in museums' collection management systems. So it's quite a technical approach. It includes an application profiles, several entities and properties that can be used, cataloging rules from the perspective of a museum professional, but also from a practitioner of intangible heritage. There are policy recommendations drawn on the spectrum procedures and on the UNESCO ethical principles. 13 proofs of concept that come from the Flemish region. And in this recording that you will get through the link, and in this document, you can read all about the work that we have done there. We also have, on the 28th of May, an international webinar on filming living heritage. One of the cases that was in the Focus Craftsmanship project that led to this webinar was, for example, the filming of the making process of a musical instrument, which is called in Dutch a draailier, for the purpose of documenting this craftsmanship with a view towards its transmission. So this Focus Craftsmanship project also delivered a toolkit providing guidance on audiovisual documentation of living heritage from the perspective of safeguarding it. So it also uses the UNESCO safeguarding methods as its point of departure. And next to this, we also have an ongoing project on the ethical sharing of data on intangible heritage through the use of persistent URI, making it possible to link data from, example, museums and archives to inventories of intangible heritage, such as the one that we are managing, linking different information sources in order to augment their relevance. And we've also taken a hard look at the traditional knowledge labels, etc., while doing this work, which is still ongoing. So voila, I hope it was interesting for you to get to know what we have done with the ICH and Museums project, and I'm open to hear all of your questions.
Thank you, Kia, so much, and thank you so much for thinking so much about us already, about the archivist approach. I think we gained a lot here, and also just again just cannot say other than just amazed by your competence on this field and your organization, what the great work you have done and still keep on doing. This is amazing. Just congratulations for that. But any questions for Kia?
I actually would have wanted to do like the workshop instead of telling you about the workshop, for example.
Maybe we can do, yeah, maybe we can do that. Yeah, we have to keep it in mind. That's a good idea. Any questions for Kia? If not, maybe just one with the working package of our project. So I was saying about the outcome that we are trying to publish, or we will publish in the end, which will be based on the work with the practitioners and then the experts and their ideas. And that should be some kind of like a white paper or regulations but we haven't kind of nailed it down yet because we wanted to keep open and see like what really the institutions, the archives want, and also what would the practitioners approve. So just you had a quite nice example in the end, but do you have a more precise idea for us? What from your experience, what should we do?
That's a very difficult question. I think I'm not able to answer that one because you will have to find out throughout speaking to all the different parties. That's what we did, for sure. I think in our case, most of the people that we talked to and worked with were really looking into practically how do I go about doing this, or how do I go about doing this, rather than having a lot of theory. They really want to like people to tell them, how can we do this, or how can we do that, or what are the resources that you're using, what are the labels that you're using, so they really want like practical solutions to complex issues, which is really difficult. Yeah. And very specific to each and every specific context and case and place. So I'm happy to think with you, but I have no specific solution yet.
Thank you. But this is good. We have still some time left with the project and some things to do. So I think this is encouraging, anyways, that we are on the right path in a way. So. But we'd be happy to also be in contact with you, Kia, in the future with the working package. And also Maui, thank you so much for coming here. And I think this has been very important for our area's archive work in totality. And we will be discussing about these things that we have heard today a lot from Maui, but also from Kia. And I think with these words, I will close up the event. If anything to say, any other final remarks, anyone? We have Oti, please.
I have a very practical one that hopefully you see my message in the chat, that if you want to follow our next events, there are a possibility to add this kind of or order this kind of newsletter from our project. Hopefully yes. You will see it. And if not, you can always send a message to me.
Yeah. And we have you can maybe also put your email address once again in the chat. And so the newsletter is there, and please be active and approach us with anything that comes to mind. But now in the Northern Hemisphere, very good springtime to all of you, and let's enjoy the sun, and thank you for this a lot, and hope to see you somewhere. Thank you, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Maui. Hello, Ben. Thank you. I think we had a quite nice amount of people, and I think they are very happy, right? Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
It
It
was-
was a good mix of people from different sectors and research and institutions and all. That's good.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think so. Yeah, I'm very happy actually. I wasn't expecting this much people, so it's always a positive thing.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I will
Yeah.
close it. Bye bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.